Day 2, change of clothes. I threw up last night, but the movie awards take priority. Iced tea. Water. And just for Andrew Warren and for us because they're tasty, donuts. Let's go! Now before we kick into our respective top 30 lists of 2019, in doing our due diligence, we wanted to hear from you. So I posed the question in multiple places a couple of times throughout the year, what your choice for best movie of 2019 really was. I have compiled the results and we will go over them now. In a 4-way tie for 5th place, with 5% of the vote respectively, we have Frozen 2,
Okay.
Zombieland Double Tap.
Really?
Yeah. The Lighthouse,
Okay.
which I would think for some people would seem relatively low, and Alita Battle Angel, which makes me very happy. Shout out to my #1 director of the year, Robert Rodriguez, if you watched earlier videos.
I mean, I guess I could see Frozen, because the people who are gonna see that movie are probably willing to love it, because they probably
Right.
love Frozen 1.
Mm-hmm. And they're probably parents, right? So it's just like,
Lighthouse.
my kid loved it.
Lighthouse, there's certainly a group of probably cinephiles that love that.
Mm-hmm.
And then what was the other one?
So the other two were...
Zombieland,
Zombieland.
I just can't see it.
Right.
Not even hate, just can't even see that.
Yeah. And then Alita.
Can't see that either.
Hmm.
And I must say, I'm not saying I hate any of the movies
Right,
that I
no,
talk
of
about
course.
here. I'm just trying to...
Put yourself in the mindset of
Yeah.
best movie of the whole year. Yeah,
I'm
exactly.
trying to find some reason, like, I know it's all subjective. But
Totally.
which is fine, so everyone's, completely valid in their opinion. It's just, there's movies that you kind of can see as Best Picture, and then there's others that are like, really? I mean, good for you for loving Zombieland and Alita that much.
Absolutely. In a 2-way tie for 3rd place, with 10% of the overall vote, is Spider-Man Far From Home and Jojo Rabbit. We hit a couple of Jojo Rabbit fans in the votes.
But TD's a name, right? So yeah, I could see both of those.
And like I thought, Far From Home, I'm sure it'll probably wind up on a list here somewhere, but like, you always take those Marvel movies and kind of compare them to their predecessors, and I can see why somebody would look at that as, especially like if they're a giant Spider-Man fan.
Yeah.
It's just like, well, it's like, yeah, I'm a fan, but this movie was really good too, so I can see how somebody would.
Yeah, I don't think I'd be surprised with any Marvel movie ever, because there's always they're good, they're all good, and then there's also like built-in fan bases for both the Marvel movies and the characters. So I'm not surprised by any Marvel movie that's someone's favorite.
And in something that I don't think we've had happen in the years that we've been doing the Fans' Choice, which I guess this is the 3rd year now, we actually have a tie up top. Each with 30% of the full vote.
I could guess one of them.
I think you could probably guess both of them if you really wanted to.
If I thought about it, but go on.
So it's Avengers Endgame and Joker.
Yeah, alright.
Yeah. Makes sense?
Yeah, that's fair.
Yeah. And
Two groups of people who are going to the movies for 2 different reasons.
Yes.
Even though there's probably overlap, but I mean, it's 2 completely different experiences.
Yeah, absolutely.
Even though they're both comic book movies.
But comic book movies trying to do 2 vastly disparate things. For sure. So there you go. There's your Fans' Choice for 2019. Co-winners, The Joker and Avengers Endgame. Pretty good bet that both of those movies are on our list somewhere. Now it's time to find out where they fall on those respective lists, or maybe if they don't fall on them at all. Stay tuned for our top 30 best movies of 2019, part 1. Justin, Tyler, Movie Awards, Top 30 Best Movies of 2019, Part 1 of 3, where we are going to go over not only our honorable mentions, but movies number 30 to number 21 on our respective lists. So, as in years past, both of us have a relatively extensive honorable mentions list. I have 11, Tyler has 8, so we will mention those movies, maybe touch on them a little bit, but they're movies that unfortunately you will not find in our top 30 list, which we kind of discussed off camera. It does kind of spoil at least a little bit of the surprise, so there is that element to it too, but we still wanted to flex a little bit and say, like, look, these are all good movies. We saw them, we enjoyed them, just didn't quite make the cut. So I will kick off with my honorable mentions list. Like I say, it's 11 movies. That list includes Booksmart, Richard Jewell, Men in Black International, which I feel like I'm the only one on that bus, Happy Death Day to You.
I like those two picks. I didn't see Men in Black, but I probably would have enjoyed it, not hated it.
Yeah.
And Happy Death Day to You too. I didn't love that movie, but I kind of respect the series. I guess we can call it a series.
Yeah.
I kind of respect it because it's kind of fun.
And that one in particular, I respect it a little bit more because I was very much not on the boat for the first one because I thought they were trying to play the first one straight, so I didn't really enjoy it as much. And then when I started seeing the trailers for this one, I'm like, oh, now I get it. I get that this is not trying to be hard serious.
See, I didn't love the first one, but I liked it, and I did. I thought they weren't playing it serious, but my only issue with this second one is that I think they should have went more crazy.
Yeah.
They did. With that premise, I think they should have just went off the wall. So they didn't, but I still enjoyed it. I'll see a third one.
Absolutely. And I'm sure there will be one.
Oh.
Continuing my list, The Beach Bum, which, is actually the movie that I predict is probably his number one. Good Boys, which we talked about a little bit earlier. Good Boys. Maleficent, Mistress of Evil, and Blinded by the Light, and then we get into a couple that, these are ones that I rated 75 out of 100, so that's 3 out of 4 ain't bad, guys, but they just didn't quite make the list. Cold Pursuit, yes. The Mustang, and Ready or Not, which showed up on a number of people's top 10 list of the year, so I was like, oh, I must seek this out towards the end of the year, and didn't quite hit for me the way it hit for some other people. So there's my list of 11 honorable mentions movies that just didn't quite make the cut. Any other impressions aside from Beach Bum? Because I'm sure that'll wind up being a conversation at some point.
I'm surprised that the Mustang is only an honorable mention, because I remember, correct me if I'm wrong, I remember your critic review saying something about it being a real passion project, and you seem to really glow about. I know your score wasn't super high, super high, but right. I'm a little surprised that Mustang isn't top 30. Very, very, very late cut. Which is a little unfortunate because it is a movie that I did want to give props to. And you talked about Matthias Schoenaerts in an earlier video, so yeah, it was a gem. It was a movie that I didn't expect that I would really enjoy as much as I did, but just kind of fell off. So my honorable mentions are Dolomite Is My Name, It Chapter 2, Jay and Silent Bob Reboot, The Mustang, Long Shot, Fast Color, and The Burial of Kojo, which is I think is one of the first movies I saw. It's a cheater, but it's one of the first movies that I saw this year. Okay, so that hung on the list for a long time. Yeah, it was, I knew that it would not be one that, unless I didn't see that many movies, wouldn't be top 30, but it's a nice little, more indie flick that maybe people should see. Same with, Fast Color. It's a superhero movie. Yeah. But it's a little different than some other superhero movies. So. Okay. Yeah, there's a couple on there that I guess I'm not surprised that they would only wind up being an honorable mention. There's a couple of movies, Long Shot is the one that kind of stands out that, I'm pretty sure you and I saw that together. Oh, yeah, I liked it. Yeah. Obviously. But the problem with me is that I see more movies than you, but I also tend to rate more favorably. So, yes. If anything's rated, a 7.5, it never makes my top 30 because I rate a little too high. It's interesting that the Mustang winds up on both of our... Yeah, I know. Yeah, that's cool. As soon as you said that, I was like, Ooh.
It's nice when we have crossover. Because, I mean, look, industry secret or spoiler if you didn't already know it, we don't know what each other's lists are. We don't talk about this after a certain point in the year, really, because we're like, okay, no more. Like, we want the genuine and authentic surprise of actually finding out what these movies are.
That's most of the fun of it.
It is, absolutely.
The only one, like, Dolomite Is My Name, I was hoping to like more than I did, because it seemed like something that would be right up my alley, and I certainly enjoyed it, but it's definitely a movie people should watch.
Without further ado, let's get to the list. And my number 30 best movie of 2019 is Rocketman.
Rocketman!
Burning down, there's something out there alone. I forgot the lyric. And I can't sing anymore or YouTube will take the video down. Yeah. So, Taron Egerton, obviously an Elton John biopic of really like a specific part of Elton John's life. And I think there was a part of the audience that was maybe hoping that it was more of his life, because it very much looks at like a specific portion. But I think there's obviously, given what happened in that specific portion, I'm sure there's lawsuits and things like that, that there's just stuff they couldn't talk about. So the jukebox fantasy musical, and that's very much what this is. It's a jukebox musical, but there's a bunch of like fantasy elements into it. It's the kind of movie that you couldn't do for every personality in the music industry, or even a lot of personalities in the music industry. But luckily, with Elton John, it works because it's like he has that personality and he has that presence from how he's always been presented to us anyway as music listeners and fans, that you can pull off that kind of movie. And Taron Egerton is so good. It was such impeccable casting. So, at a rating of 75 out of 100, Rocketman, my number 30 best movie of 2019.
I didn't see it, like a spoiler. But what interested me about it, I just never got around to it, was the fantasy elements that I saw in the trailer. Yeah. And I enjoy Elton John, but I just never ended up seeing it. So
I know we only had it at our theater for maybe 2 weeks.
Yeah.
It was a very limited engagement in small town Nova Scotia, the Elton John biopic, but you know.
I should have watched it. So my number 30 is Jojo Rabbit. I lied a little because I did give this a 7.5 instead of an 8, so I lied. I expected to like this more than I did, because I enjoy Watiti like many other people, and you know, the premise was fun. You know, an imaginary friend that happens to be Hitler, and it has rabbit in the title, so that appeals to me. And it wasn't quite as funny because his other movies made me laugh a lot more.
Okay.
So, you know, I'm going against the people's choice a little bit on this one, but I do enjoy it enough to, you know, put it as number 30. I just wish I would have liked it more.
And you're kind of subverting my expectation a little bit, because that's lower than I thought. Because like not knowing ahead of time or not remembering ahead of time or whatever what you rated that movie, I did expect it to be somewhere higher in your 20s, maybe even pushing 20. So wow, there you go. See, right off the bat,
surprise,
subverted expectations. A movie that I unfortunately did not see. Spoilers.
Oh, dang.
Yeah, it was on that very short list right at the end of the year, and had I not fallen asleep last night, it may have actually wound up being the movie that I watched last night. My number 29, best movie of 2019. Actually, before I give it, I have to ask you a question.
Yay!
So, if you had to guesstimate the number of movies that I have watched between 2009 and now, so like the last 10 years basically, maybe 11. If you had to guesstimate, just a very round number.
So like 10 years.
Yeah, so like 10 years. How many movies do you think I've watched in that period of time? And that is contextual to what my pick is.
725.
Okay. It's closer to about 1,000.
Oh, you must have some really good years.
I had a couple of really good years. So the reason that I asked that question is my number 29, best movie of 2019, is Zombieland Double Tap. So it's been about 10 years since the first one came out. First one that I really, really enjoyed. Now, the second one, the sequel, if you will, as the laymen call it, the sequel, most everything that worked for me in the first movie still worked for me here.
Yes.
However, I will admit, I didn't enjoy this second one as much as the first one, even with that gap of time that came in between it, due in no small part to the fact that I've seen about 1,000 movies since then. I really enjoyed Zombieland Double Tap. It wouldn't be on this list if I didn't. It just didn't quite have the impact for me of the first one. And I did have to point out that, like, okay, so you have kind of the naming convention, because I have no question in my mind that there will be a third Zombieland. Probably it'll take less time, I would think, than the first and second did. So they kind of have the naming convention where, like, okay, so you had Zombieland, and the sequel was called Double Tap. Well, Double Tap happens to be the name of Columbus's second rule. That's his second rule, Double Tap. So they're going to have to find a different naming convention for the third one, because Columbus's third rule is beware of bathrooms. So you can't really call the third movie, unless you're really going to lean into that. I guess maybe you can. I liked how the Zombieland universe kind of expanded a little bit. I like the additional characters that they brought in. There's a lot about the movie to like. Just didn't quite hit me the same way it did in 2009. So at a rating of 75 out of 100, Zombieland Double Tap, my number 29.
Yeah, I liked it too, but pretty much everything you said is how I feel. I enjoyed it. I didn't like it as much. Stuff still worked. And one thing you didn't note, the zombie genre, we've seen so much since that it's a little harder to impress anyway.
It is.
So my 29 is The Light of My Life. This almost went drastically different for me, because the beginning of this movie, I think they're in a tent. Well, they're in some shelter. I believe it's a tent. And it's just Casey Affleck's character talking to his daughter. And he's just telling this story. And that's all that's happening, is he's telling this story. And it was literally 10 to 15 minutes of just telling a story.
Okay.
And I thought it was so boring. I know that it's supposed to tie in and whatnot, but I was so bored. I was like, oh, is this what this movie is? Just this slow and this, I'm not going to say pointless, but I felt like it was pointless and just boring. And then after that, though, it was still slow, but I ended up enjoying the slow burn and the cinematography and the interactions between the two. And the movie didn't do anything substantial or original, but it did what it did well after that 10 to 15 minutes, and there was some emotional depth, and I really connected to the two characters, and I really loved the last line of dialogue. It really got to me. It could have easily been a worst movie of the year if it would have stayed like it was at the very beginning, because that's not good to start your movie in a way that's like, wow, this sucks. Like, I enjoyed the beginning of Replicas more,
right,
than this. Well, the robot.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, that's true.
That part I enjoyed more than the beginning in this, but then this did redeem itself quite a bit for me, and I think it's an underrated movie of the year. So my number 29 is Light of My Life.
Okay. Which, you kind of felt the same way potentially about the beginning of that as I felt about the beginning of The Haunting of Sharon Tate. Because I'm like, no two characters say lines to each other for the first 10 minutes. Yeah. It's just like, now you're wasting my time. It's always nice to find those underrated gems, and that's kind of what the first part of this list a lot of the time winds up being. It's like, it's stuff I didn't love, but I certainly didn't expect it to be here.
Yeah. The first 10 or so are almost more fun.
My number 28 best movie of 2019 is Shazam, and that movie has wound up on the top 10 or top 15 lists of people that I didn't think this movie was going to wind up on. Simply because, look, I'll start everything off by saying, A, yes, I enjoyed it, and B, there's room in the superhero lexicon for this.
Yes.
Right? Because it's obviously, it's very different. Shazam is arguably the Jimmy Fallon of superheroes, but that's fine. There's room in the lexicon for that. There's room in the superhero genre for comedy, and there's room in the superhero genre for the reluctant hero that's, got confidence issues with their own powers, and there's all kinds of room in the genre for this, and it was a relatively enjoyable movie. I kind of walked into it with I think if I would have walked in with expectations, I wouldn't have enjoyed it as much. But I walked in with literally zero. I was like, I know nothing virtually about this character other than the fact that he yells his own name. I don't think that Mark Strong presented a particularly strong, no pun intended, pun intended,
Nah.
hell with it. I don't think he presented a particularly strong villain, except for a couple of scenes that, interestingly enough, the director just like ratcheted the violence up. And it's just like, wow, that was not expected in this movie. And there are certain scenes that it's like, wow, that's actually kind of inspired, or wow, that's interesting in the larger context of the movie. So certainly, probably the superhero movie that I was least fond of this year, but I did still enjoy myself, and it was still entertaining. So at, again, a rating of 75 out of 100, Shazam winds up my number 28.
I didn't want to see it at all, but I enjoyed it. It's not great. It was mildly funny.
Yeah.
So my number 28 is Gloria Bell. This basically lives and dies with the performance by Julianne Moore, which I put her, I think, at number 2 on my best actresses list.
I believe so.
Because the premise itself of a 50-year-old trying to find love in clubs and stuff, it's okay, but it's not something that I'm really drawn to. And I'm mostly, because I'm not quite a 50-year-old woman yet. But Julianne Moore, I heard her performance was good, and plus it was Julianne Moore, so I expected. And basically she elevated all of the material. So I ended up actually enjoying the movie more than expected. Because I didn't expect it to be on this list. I expected maybe an actress nod, but not that I'd actually really enjoy the movie. And I did really enjoy the movie. But that's pretty much just because of Julianne Moore.
Right.
So, yeah. Number 28 is Gloria Bell.
Okay. Now, that sounds very similar to a Lisa Genova, a movie based on a Lisa Genova book that I can't recall the title to right now, but it was about, like, Alzheimer's.
Yeah.
And she plays the lead character, and that was basically the same way that I felt about that movie, which is, like, she elevates every single other person that's in this movie. Yeah. Like, it lives and dies on her, and luckily it lives because she's a national treasure. My number 27 best movie of 2019 is, and I have to say it in the proper voice, The Goldfinch. So The Goldfinch, the story of a mother and a young son who are separated by a terrorist attack in a museum, and then it basically follows the young boy as he grows up in that world and in that context. And it's, first of all, I've never seen a movie by John Crowley before. He was the director.
What else has he done?
I'm trying to think of what other stuff John Crowley has done. I can't think of it right off the top of my head, but I did take note that I was like, have I ever seen anything by this director before? And the answer was no. So I was like, all right, I am interested now in going back and seeking out other things based on what he did in this movie. Obviously, since it's a heavy drama, it relies very, very much on its performances. And when you have Ansel Elgort, you had Finn Wolfhard was in the movie, Sarah Paulson is in the movie, Nicole Kidman gives an excellent performance in the movie. But I have to say, not the best performance, but the standout, other than Ansel Elgort, has to be, weirdly enough, shout out Luke Wilson.
Ah, old Luke.
Because I remember watching a movie back in 2009. We're keeping it with the 10-year theme. Back in 2009, I remember watching a movie called Middleman. And I remember at the end of that movie, I was like, wow, Luke Wilson can't act. He cannot act at all. And I have to amend that, and I have to apologize for that, because he's not in the movie for a long time. But as a degenerate gambler scumbag, he played an excellent role in this movie. Very short time, but he really played that really, really well. Was incredibly believable. And getting to play off of, like, Finn Wolfhard, and just getting to have those kind of people to sort of play off of, and play off of Sarah Paulson as well. Shout out to him, because I was like, this is far and away the best Luke Wilson I've ever seen. But again, John Crowley, kudos, at a rating of 75 out of 100. The Goldfinch, my number 27 best movie of 2019.
I didn't see it, I had no interest in seeing it, but I'm glad you liked it.
Yeah.
So my number 27 is a documentary called The Rise of Jordan Peterson.
Ooh.
And I'm conflicted about how I want to talk about this movie.
Mm-hmm.
Because he's a hot button issue, and I don't want to just sit here and talk to you for an hour about him as a person. It's a pretty compelling documentary, even though I actually know a lot about him, so I didn't really learn that much.
Okay.
And I find it's probably hard to make a movie that's about an hour and a half long and document both the rise of him and why he's so important to so many people. Mm-hmm. Because people hate on him, But there are many more people who are finding meaning in their life because of him. But you're always going to have haters. So if I leave it at that, then that's my number 27. And I don't know if we want to talk about Jordan Peterson.
Right.
But, yeah.
Well, let's try to touch, I guess, on it briefly. Because, like you say, people have feelings about Jordan Peterson.
People have feelings about Jordan Peterson.
I will say, like, a lot of people know I work in a bookstore, and not at our store specifically, but on like a company level. There were a couple of groups that were trying to get his book banned.
So that's so stupid.
Which I mean, look, I don't really feel like we should ban any books.
No.
Like if you're a store that wants to carry Mein Kampf, I think you should carry Mein Kampf, at least as a piece of historical, just for the historical record. But not that I believe anything that's in Mein Kampf. I'm not saying that.
We have to say that.
We have to specify that.
Not a Nazi.
Exactly.
Talking about Jordan Peterson, who's apparently a Nazi according to some people.
Right. So I mean, I didn't watch that Jordan Peterson documentary. I didn't even know it existed. So
I actually think
good information.
I guess something I don't think I said was it did do a good job of kind of showing both sides of the argument.
Okay.
Now, mind you, as I sat there and listened to most of the people on the opposing side of Jordan Peterson, I kind of felt they were digging their own grave. Except his, like, there's a part where his, like, old friend, who, like, I don't think is his friend anymore, is talking about him, and I actually thought that was pretty compelling, his views. Not that I necessarily agree,
right,
but I thought it was pretty interesting what he was saying.
My number 26 best movie of 2019 is Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark. So what Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark did is, like, that was a trilogy, I believe at least, of collections of short horror stories for kids back in, I don't know if it was the 80s or it was the late 70s or something like that. They've since now been re-released because the movie came out, so you can actually now, you can go buy your kid short horror stories.
Yeah.
Come to my store and do it, please. Some of the antagonists and storylines from those short stories kind of amalgamated into this movie that had an overarching story. You just had certain elements that were kind of cherry-picked from certain ones of these short stories, and it really struck me as like, okay, so the screenplay is not great, the characters are about as wooden as Noah's Ark, and that's fine, but all I wanted going into that was like, give me a visually interesting horror movie that's got some scares in it, that I already go into it knowing it's at least a little bit geared towards children because that's what the source material is. So I was comfortable with that, and I walked in and I was like, ooh, Papa Guillermo very much has his fingers in this, and I can tell visually, like, the way certain things look. I can't remember whether he directed it or just produced it.
He produced it.
Yeah, so it was like, okay, cool. So I know visually his hands are all over this, so I know, at least on that level, I know I'm really going to like it. And I left being like, you gave me exactly what I wanted in this movie. You gave me a relatively interesting horror story, with interesting visual elements and audio elements, whatever. There's obviously tons of territory still to go. I wouldn't be surprised, not having the financials right in front of me, I don't know, but I wouldn't be surprised if they wound up doing this as a trilogy, because there are 3 collections of Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark, so wouldn't be surprised to see that happen. But at a rating of 75 out of 100, Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark, my number 26 best movie of 2019.
It all sounds very interesting to me. I just never got around to seeing it. I had meant to. But I like the idea of taking a whole bunch of books and taking a bunch of stuff from them and all putting it all in one movie. I remember the show, like, Castle Rock.
Yes.
Was that for Stephen King? Not that I'm a big, like, Stephen King... I don't know that much about Stephen King, but I like the idea of just kind of putting different parts of, like, the mythos and whatnot.
Yeah. In
there, so I like the idea of that movie quite a bit. I just never got around to watching it. So speaking of horror movies for kids, my number 26 is Us.
Yeah.
So
for the kids.
Yes, I'm a little conflicted. It's weird that this one is even 26, just because there are things I really don't like about this movie. I feel that it has higher highs but lower lows than Get Out. But ultimately, I ended up enjoying this more because the highs were quite high. But I do have criticisms. I mentioned the performance with the raspy voice. I understand that she was choked as a girl, but yet I'm listening to it sometimes, and I thought it sounded real silly. And I didn't love the beginning of the home invasion, but then it ended up redeeming itself.
Right.
But as a whole, there was some really inspired scenes, and Jordan Peele has, as I noted before, has really grown as a director, and there are some truly amazing scenes. But yeah, he seems to have gone more towards horror than comedy this time, whereas I felt Get Out was more of a mixture of both. And I didn't even necessarily feel like the comedy worked that much in this one either. However, I did really enjoy it, like I said, and the beginning made me uncomfortable, but that's mostly because it was bunnies in a cage. I don't like that image. That's a personal thing, and we commented on the final part there, going underground and thinking that was really awesome, and it was one of the best, really one of the best scenes of the year. I'm not on the Jordan Peele bandwagon to the point that some other people are, but I do like that we have a unique voice in horror that has risen up past his beginnings, which I don't actually like Key and Peele that much. There was like a few skits that I enjoyed throughout, and I watched a couple seasons of it, and I was like, why am I watching this?
Right.
Dude has made 2 movies that have been well received, even if not as much by me. But let's not get carried away yet. Let's let him make a few, and then we can start talking about that. But with that said, even though I've crapped on my number 26 a little bit, I still enjoyed Us, and there was a lot to think about. It was not a movie that you just go in and look at the surface. Because I saw that criticism of, even the person I saw it with didn't like it as much as Get Out because it demanded more of its audience to really think about what it is. And that's fine if you don't want to think about a movie, you just want to go watch it and be thrilled. But this demanded more, and you really had to think about what it was saying and what it was doing, and then maybe that's the main reason why I liked this one more than Get Out. And Get Out had fine, social commentary and whatnot. I think Us is ultimately better than Get Out.
My number 25 best movie of 2019 is Jumanji, the second one, which is technically the third one, but it's the second one like this. And I don't know who told Jumanji, the next level, that it had any right to be as good as it is. Because I went into the movie going like, okay, so I didn't expect Welcome to the Jungle to be good.
Yes.
And I was like, this is entertaining. I actually enjoy this.
Agreed.
So I walk into the second one going like, okay, now it's a sequel to the one that I didn't think was going to be any good. This must be the one that torpedoes it. And in most every measurable way that I can think of, I thought this was a significant step forward from the first one. I thought it was funnier. I thought it had a better story. I thought it had a better screenplay. I thought it had better performances. I like the different spin they put on going into the game, where they didn't actually just kind of fumble futz their way into it, but you had the one guy that was just like, life was better in the game, so he goes back in, and then everybody else has to go back in to get him back out because he's gonna die. And I gotta point out, Karen Gillan, aka the redhead,
very good looking.
she is a superstar in the making. Like, in the next 5 years, Karen Gillan is gonna be huge. That's my prediction.
I saw an article of them wanting to cast her as, I think, Triss in The Witcher.
Danny goddamn DeVito steals literally every scene that he is in this movie, and I want to see him cast as the disgruntled grandpa in everything. I don't care what the movie is. Cast him as the disgruntled grandpa in The Witcher. I don't care.
Yeah.
I want to see Danny DeVito in everything. At a rating of 75 out of 100, Jumanji, The Next Level. This is my number 25 best movie of 2019.
I didn't see it, but I felt the same way about the first Jumanji, so maybe I would have felt the same way about the second Jumanji,
Quite
and that's
possible.
all I got to say about that.
There you go. Nailed it.
So my number 25 is a cheater pick. It's Birds of Passage.
Ooh, okay.
This one is a good example of why the first maybe 10 picks that we have are some of the most interesting, because it allows you to talk about the flawed but interesting movies, and I think Birds of Passage is that. I saw I saw it mentioned in a bunch of lists all through the year, and then I watched it, and I gave it an 8 out of 10, so I certainly enjoyed it. But I did feel that the story itself was a little weak, and there was good performances, but nothing that really stood out. However, I love the setting of it because it's a refreshing take for the genre. I love how it was shot. It was beautiful. And I ended up thinking, this is flawed. It has, it's not perfect, but I did really enjoy it. And it was one of the foreign movies this year that I actually ended up, I expected to like, and then actually ended up liking a fair bit, because I had a bit of a problem this year with movies that I expected a lot more from, and I didn't quite get what I wanted. But Birds of Passage was a nice take on the crime genre in a different place of the world with different types of people, and it was quite an interesting movie.
Okay. My number 24 best movie of 2019 is Dr. Sleep. So the direct sequel to The Shining obviously comes out decades and decades later. One thing that I really liked about this, aside from any of the aesthetics of the movie, which the aesthetics of the movie I thought were fantastic. I loved the set pieces. It was satisfyingly dark. But one of the things that I really, really enjoyed was that you do not have to be an authoritative expert on The Shining to go in and watch that movie. It gives you enough of what happened in The Shining and enough of the concept behind The Shining that you have the information with which to move forward. Not every sequel does that. It doesn't necessarily give you the satisfactory information to move forward, and The Shining actually did. And I firmly know that this is a weird way to judge movies, but I'm just thank you for giving me enough information as someone that has watched The Shining but hasn't watched it in the last 15 years. So, I'm not exactly up on all of my lore. So obviously, Ewan McGregor, excellent performance. Rebecca Ferguson, one of my favorite female performances of the year. I know it didn't make any list, but it did make his, and I just love Rebecca Ferguson. And I love the way that they kind of expanded the Shining universe. And there was just so much about this. Again, the aesthetic, satisfyingly dark from the beginning of the movie to the end, had a really, really, really satisfying ending. And it was arguably it was certainly among my favorite horror-ish movies of the year. So at a rating of 75 out of 100, Dr. Sleep, my number 24.
It's not as good as The Shining, though.
No.
I would say it's not even close, but it's still a good movie. However, didn't they... I could be wrong here. Wasn't Dr. Sleep more of an adaptation of the actual novel than, because The Shining, apparently, I haven't read the book for The Shining, but apparently, King hated The Shining movie because it was, nothing like his book. But then, so you had the Dr. Sleep movie sequel, which I think was trying to adapt the book, but then also pay homage to the movie, because of, certain imagery that came back for the movie, and I don't know what was in the books or not, because I'm no Stephen King, expert.
Could very well be.
So that's kind of an interesting... difficult line if that's what was happening. I mean, I could be wrong. Maybe it was just a straight whatever, but that's what I thought I remember reading, that it was more of actually adapting the book this time around.
Yeah, I do think it did stay more faithful to the actual book itself.
So that's quite an accomplishment. If the Shining movie was completely different than the book, then that's quite but it was cohesive, so I mean, good on him. I enjoyed it. I think I gave it a 7 out of 10 or something, which I liked it. And I liked Rebecca Ferguson's performance a lot. So, yeah. Okay. My number 24 is Captain Marvel.
Yeah.
Which I just said off camera. It doesn't even feel like that came out this year.
I know.
I literally had to make sure I didn't put a 2018 movie on my list. Because it just feels so long ago now. We've had Endgame and everything's all shaken up, and it's oh yeah, by the way, Captain Marvel came out this year. I pretty much always rate the MCU movies now at least an 8 out of 10. Yeah. I always think they're great. However, I will say that Captain Marvel is not one of the better 8 out of 10s, which, that's a real good problem to have. It's yeah, it's not as good, but it's still an 8 out of 10, so I still really enjoyed it, because it still suffers from a lame villain.
Yes.
And that's a problem that a lot of these have. The female empowerment, aspect of it was so poorly done this time. Like, she came across as crotchety, like with a real chip on her shoulder, and kind of went a little too far. Whereas I will, I'll extend an olive branch here. Like a movie like Wonder Woman did it beautifully, and and men can do this too if they want male empowerment. Like, they can run this risk of like shitting too much on the opposite gender in order to get that. And I think that Captain Marvel actually did that a little too much. So I had like a slight issue with that. Some people were like, yeah, of course you would, you're a guy. But I still find that to be a pretty minor criticism, because ultimately I enjoyed it. I actually thought, like, I don't hate Brie Larson. I actually thought she brought quite a bit to the role. And I've enjoyed her since, Room, I think it was, which isn't that long ago. But I really liked her in that. And I have not gotten on this Brie Larson is a stuck-up bitch train that was going around.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, because, like, the interviews and stuff, she came across as snotty and all this stuff and the things she said. And, like, I'm not really on that train. I still like her as an actress. So I do really enjoy Captain Marvel. It was fun. There were some fun musical cues, and the action was good. And I wish the villain was a little better ultimately. But at this point, though, you just accept it, because it's not called Captain Marvel versus the villain. It's Captain Marvel, so they want to focus on Captain Marvel. And it's like, I get that. It would be nice if they could also implement a really good villain, because they have on occasion in the MCU.
That's actually an interesting nomenclature observation, where you say it's not Captain Marvel versus whatever, it's just Captain Marvel. And I never actually thought of it that way. And it's like, oh, that actually would be a way to do an interesting naming convention. But then also put yourself under the gun where your villain better be good.
Yes.
And it does kind of feel like we're right back to where the MCU was 5 years ago, in so much as, man, this whole genre suffers from really not great villains. And then Thanos came along, and I think we all kind of forgot about it. It's like, oh my god, Thanos is so great. Captain Marvel will always hold at least one interesting distinction for me personally, and for a lot of fans, obviously, of the MCU and Marvel Comics in general, where you have that scene on the bus where she pulls down the screenplay of Mallrats, and it's Stan Lee reading the screenplay for Mallrats, because it would have been taking place around the time that Kevin Smith was like, hey, I want you in Mallrats. So it's really kind of an interesting Easter egg there, and I know it made Kevin Smith absolutely bawl. My number 23, best movie of 2019, which has the distinction of being the final movie that I rated 75 out of 100, is Ford versus Ferrari. Now, I talked about it a little bit earlier in a previous video in connection with Christian Bale as a best actor. And obviously it's the story of people within the Ford Motor Company wanting to beat Ferrari at the 24 Hours of Le Mans, which is considered, obviously one of the greatest worldwide races of all time. So, obviously, great performance from Matt Damon, great performance from Christian Bale, very solid direction. And what I felt when I left the movie was, and I've used this phrase, as almost a stock phrase of mine to describe certain movies in the past, and it's, there's virtue in conventional storytelling done really well. Yeah. And that's what I thought this movie was. I didn't think this movie broke the mold in any real significant way, but it was conventional storytelling done very, very well. And it was just very, very strongly performed, very strongly produced, obviously the excellent performances, and I just left the movie really enjoying it. And I've actually rated this a lot lower than a lot of other people that have seen this movie. Like, this is getting a lot of talk, not just for Christian Bale, but getting talk in terms of, one of the better movies of the year, and it only winds up being number 23 on my list. The final number 75, Ford versus Ferrari, at 23rd best.
Allow me to call back a previous video you had, I think when you were talking about Christian Bale, you had said that to some people this movie is just a car movie, and it's not that, it's beyond that. You said something like that. You probably worded it better than me. I agree with you. However, I don't like cars. So to me it was in part a car movie. Yeah. But I still enjoyed it, but I didn't like it that much. And I said in my Critica review, if I was more into cars, I bet you I would have really, really liked this. But the truth is, anything that dealt with the actual car aspect of it, which is plentiful, plentiful in it, I didn't really care for. So it's just a me thing, right? That I didn't love it. But I do agree with you that it is more than just a car movie. And it has good performances and, good conventional storytelling and stuff. It's just a subject matter, not my thing.
Yeah,
that's all.
That's fair.
Just a bias, really. Okay, my number 23 is I Lost My Body, which ended up picking up some steam at the end of the year. I started seeing it in lists when I was trying to look for movies I might not know of.
Okay.
It's an animated movie, and it's beautiful in two ways. The animation is really awesome, and the music is also very awesome. It's a movie of two stories. There's one where it's a guy falling in love with a girl, and that's honestly a little less compelling. It's good. It's a nice meditation on fate and love and all that stuff, and that's fine. Mm-hmm. But the other part of the movie is a dismembered hand trying to find its way through a city, and I felt for that hand. It adds an interesting perspective to everything because you think about it, right? It's basically now we're humans, so we're big, so everything looks smaller. However, when you're a hand, you're basically like a little animal, right? So it's running through things and it's coming across rats, and the rats are actually like a force that it has to deal with and stuff. And it added a lot of interesting perspective things to it, trying to basically platform from thing to thing, running on its fingers and try to get back to its owner.
Okay.
And it's just. It's kind of one of those movies that maybe only get away with if it's animated. And it's very weird sounding, but it's also very good. And I don't really have any problems with it aside of the fact that the other part of the story is maybe not as good. So if the movie didn't have the hand in it, it would be a lesser movie. However, it's in there, so you can't really criticize it like, oh, without the hand it would be less. It's kind of like this is an argument I hate, people saying, yeah, well, The Dark Knight is only really great because of the Ledger performance. It's like, yeah, that's in there.
Yeah.
Why doesn't that count? But the hand's in there, and that's the best part of it.
What an interesting choice.
Yeah,
I like it.
I Lost My Body is my number, what was it, 23?
23.
We'll go with 23. If it's not 23, well...
Fix it in post.
Yeah.
That's a really interesting choice. It reminds me, just by title, it reminds me of this manga that has been coming into the store lately called I Want to Eat Your Pancreas.
Yes, I've heard of that.
And I just look at it and I'm just like, what is that title even?
Yes.
And now with you, with a movie like that, that's a really interesting choice. I like it.
Yeah, I like good titles. There was one, I'm going to screw this up, but it was, I think, a Japanese movie. I never ended up loving the movie, which is a shame because I really want to talk about it. Now I get to. It's something like, when I come home, my wife always pretends to be dead.
Getting close to the end on this video, folks. Just 2 more movies for each of us until we move on to the next chunk of the awards. My number 22 best movie of 2019 is a movie that I definitely expected to be significantly higher on this list, probably pushing a top 10, maybe even a top 5 spot. It is Robert Eggers' The Lighthouse, which we got a chance to talk about a little bit earlier in an earlier video, obviously praising his direction and the way the movie looks, and even some certain elements of the storytelling. And obviously the performances by Willem Dafoe and Robert Pattinson are both excellent. But I don't know if I have to wave the inaccessibility flag, or maybe I'm just not smart enough. It's possible that I'm just not smart enough to get some of the stuff that they're going for in this movie. It is an interesting exploration of the psychological effects of isolationism, sure. And obviously the movie's going to hold a place in my heart because it was filmed in Nova Scotia, and anything that gets filmed here, I at least want to give a chance to. But I just plain didn't wind up enjoying it as much as I thought I would. And that's only in saying that, I thought it was going to be significantly higher on this list than it actually was. But again, there's a lot about this movie to really, really like. It warrants multiple viewings. It's not a crazy long watch. It's only like an hour and a half or a little more than that, so it's not like it's this big 2.5 hour epic that you have to slog through. It does warrant multiple viewings, but at only a rating of 80 out of 100, The Lighthouse is my number 22.
I'll do you one better. It's not even on my list.
No.
It's. I said, like you said, the technical aspects are fantastic, and he's good at that. And I did say this because I didn't want to get too much into it when I talked about his directing in a previous video. But the stuff that exists within that world, I'm not that much of a fan of. And I still rated this maybe a 7 or a 7.5, so I did still enjoy it. Yeah. I didn't hate it by any means. I always seem to have a problem with The Witch. I had a problem with the writing. I had a problem with the writing in this. And I'll still seek out anything he makes because he is an interesting voice. He has good vision. There's really not too much like even The Lighthouse like this year. Certainly unique and well done, but the writing let it down for me. So I wanted to love it. I was like you. I expected it to be at least top 10, if not top 5. But alas, it didn't even make my honorable mentions. It was actually on my expected more list, one of the 14 movies that I expected more. But I kind of didn't want to ruin that I didn't love it because I wasn't sure how you felt about it, and I wanted there to be like a surprise there. But it turns out we feel somewhat similar.
Yeah, for sure.
So it's not as big a surprise as I actually thought. So my number 22 is a Peanut Butter Falcon. I don't know if I expected to like this more than I did or not, but I also just thoroughly enjoyed it. There's something to be said about just a nice, sweet, breezy story. You know, there's difficulties, but, you know, it's nothing too major. Right. Just some good chemistry between Shia and Zach. Yep. And as you noted, because you put him in your best actors, but Zach's performance was wonderful, and I had considered putting him on mine. I came really close to. Yeah, that's pretty much it. It's a fun little romp. It does it well. It has a kind of cool premise. I wouldn't say that it hit some emotional level that, like, there was emotion in there for sure, but it wasn't. It's not a movie that I'm necessarily going to remember forever, but I don't need that in all my movies. And I just thought, like, I was never bored. I was entertained the entire time, and there's room for movies like that, kind of like you said about conventional storytelling. That's kind of what I'm saying here, I suppose. It's like maybe the premise is a little different. Like, I do really like the premise. It didn't do as much with the premise as maybe it could have, but that's fine. Like, I really enjoyed myself. You know, it's an 8. It's a solid 8 out of 10. I don't really have too much bad to say about it.
No, fair enough. So. And shout out to Dakota Johnson, who just stays great.
Oh yeah, I forgot that she was. Yeah, I forgot she was in it too.
The final 2 movies of Part 1 now begin with my number 21 best movie of 2019, and it is the Lego Movie, the second part.
Right, that was this year too.
That was this year too, yeah. The early part of the year feels like such a blur because it's like so much stuff happened this year.
And then Endgame happened, and that felt like a new year.
Exactly, yeah, it did. It did kind of feel like the nuclear bomb that was just like, all right, movie year begins now. So look, kind of like what I said about Zombieland Double Tap. It's like the territory that this mines and the things that this movie does, for the most part, still worked for me. I kind of thought the first one had maybe a little bit of a better story, but I can also chalk that up for the most part to seeing it for the first time and going, oh my god, look at what they did with this Lego universe. In pretty much every measurable way, I think this is a pretty worthy sequel to the first one. There's emotional content there that maybe I would have liked to have shown up a little bit earlier in the movie. Like, we're getting to like the final 10 or 15 minutes before it's like, oh yeah, crap, we got some emotional content in there we got to get in there too. So I would have liked to have seen that show up a little bit earlier. But when it does show up, ultimately it's quality. And like I said, most of what worked in the first one continued to work in the second one. I do have my questions about exactly how much more territory there is to mine here. Like, how much further can they really go? If there's a third one, I'll be down to see a third one, but at a rating of 80 out of 100, the Lego Movie, the second part, my number 21 best movie of 2019.
I didn't see it.
Ooh, okay.
I was never as in love with the first one as a lot of people, but I certainly enjoyed it, and I think the animation is wonderful. And I'm sure the animation is still wonderful in this one.
Yeah, definitely.
I just never, I don't know. I had it to watch, I just never ended up watching it. There's always something I would rather watch.
Right.
And then I just got rid of it.
Yeah, I don't necessarily think that you missed anything fundamental by not watching it, right? It's a lot of more of the same, but still to a certain quality. Just maybe not quite as quality as the first one.
My number 21 is Good Boys. Good Boys! I like this more than you did.
Yeah.
I actually really enjoyed it, but there were some hokey parts, for sure, and there were some moments where it dipped into that, oh, this is funny because it's kids swearing, ha ha ha, which I wasn't a fan of because that gets old.
Yeah.
However, I also think there was a lot of really good jokes. I laughed quite a bit. There was even some moments where it felt a little subversive. But I don't know if that was the intention of the movie or not, but it felt a little subversive, which I appreciated. And I liked the kids together, and I don't know, there is some charm to kids swearing.
Yeah.
But it's just, there's a line, and sometimes the movie did cross it. But for the most part, I didn't feel that they did, and I ended up maybe enjoying this even a little more than I expected to. And I was fairly excited for it. So, yeah, so my number 21 is Good Boys.
And I mean, Jacob Tremblay.
Yeah.
Like, Jacob Tremblay is Jacob Tremblay.
He's a good boy.
He is a good boy. One thing about Good Boys before we close, Keith Williams, who is the little black child.
Oh, yes.
He's a scene stealer.
Yeah.
Like, every time he's in a scene, like, he'll just say one little offshoot line.
Yes.
And he is such a scene stealer. Like, I wanted to see more of him. Like, he was so... Like, obviously, Jacob Tremblay is great. And there's plenty of laughs to be found in the movie. I guess I just wanted to laugh a little bit more and kind of wanted the inevitable heartfelt content, because there is that in there. Like, I kind of wanted that maybe to hit home a little bit more than it did for me. So again, I didn't dislike the movie. It's on my honorable mentions. But yeah, Keith especially is such a scene stealer in that movie.
Yeah, the emotional content hit for me. So I never mentioned that. But yeah, it hit for me. It just worked for me more than it worked for you. Which is okay.
Because the Good Boys.
The Good Boys.
There you have it, folks. Part 1 of 3. Movies 30 to 21 are now in the books for the 2019 Justin and Tyler Movie Awards. Your next video will comprise movies number 20 all the way up to number 11 of the best movies of 2019. See you in a minute.